This is Domestication for the Rise of Civilization. So here you can see the horrible truth behind whipped cream. It's a joke, ha ha. Here's my two donkeys, Harry and Heidi. They're miniature donkeys. So what is domestication? A lot of times students think it's just the cultivation of plants. Some people think it's just animals. But basically, here's the definition, which you could read for yourself. But basically, it has to do with our relationship with plants and animals. And even though it says it's symbiotic, which means it should be mutually reciprocal, we actually intervene in their life cycle. We provide protection. We clear out competitors. And of course, we manipulate reproduction. So before we get to actual farming, what you need to understand is we have the pastoralists. These are herders. And they really play into the history of some of these civilizations because they always usually cause problems for people who were out and out farmers. So it means they're herders. The animals were not totally domesticated. Usually, again, the land is set aside from where the farmers are, and it really does require a lot of mobility. Again, sometimes there was raiding, and a lot of times the people who were farmers would encroach on the land that was used for grazing by the pastoralists. So this would always factor into problems. This actually even happened in the Old West between the sheepmen and the cattlemen in the United States. So what actually is the mechanism for domestication? Well, here you can read it. It has to do with genetic changes. And a lot of times these changes are physically recognizable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about plants. Personally, I'm not a big plant person, but when you're at a site, you need to look for the remnants of plants. And then there are paleobotanists who deal specifically with seeds and spores, and they can actually tell whether or not the plant material that was found was from a domesticated plant or a wild plant. So how can you tell wild versus domesticated plants at a site, and how can you tell if people were farmers? Well, archaeologically, you're going to look for evidence of plants. Usually, again, these have to do with spores. I have a friend that went into paleobotany, and he spent a lot of time looking at looking under things on microscopes. So here are a few ways you can tell. First of all, you're going to see an increase in size of the plant spores or pieces of the plant, of course larger in the domesticated versions. You're going to look for loss of protective mechanisms, because if a plant, for the most part, especially a grain or something that you're going to be using a lot of, is domesticated, you don't want a lot of toxins, you don't want a lot of thorns. You're going to see a change in duration. Now, the next one is really interesting. You're going to see a reduction or loss of natural mechanisms for dissemination, meaning that in wild plants there are these things called rachis that hold the actual spores used for reproduction. In wild plants, these are really, really brittle, so that when the wind blows, they come apart and the seeds of the plant just scatter everywhere. Thus, my lawn in summer with dandelions. Now, how else can we tell at a site if people were farmers? Well, guess what? You're going to find farming tools. They actually very early on had stone sickles. You're going to find all kinds of stuff. And last but not least, Usually whenever you find pottery, it's in association with people who were agriculturalists. Find pottery, you know that they were farming. Hunters and gatherers, for the most part, do not use pottery. Okay, what about animals? How can you tell domesticated versus wild animals at a site? And what mechanisms were bred for in domesticated animals? Now, again, for almost every animal, there's a wild counterpart. Okay? Usually, domesticated versions are always smaller in size. The only exception to that is the guinea pig. I have no idea why. But we think that they were bred maybe because they were easier to handle. We're not really sure what went on there, but they were always smaller. You're going to have a breeding for tameness or insensitivity to human presence, meaning that the animals, you don't want them running all over and stampeding. Other changes. In sheep, you're going to have an increase in woolliness. Makes sense, because if you're going to use the wool. In goats and most animals with horns, you're actually going to see a difference in horn shape between the wild and domesticated version. And you're going to see burials. I'll show you in the next slide a picture of one of the first burials we have on the planet that we know of a person with an animal. And then the other thing, again, you're going to find evidence of things used for animal husbandry. If it's horses, you might find bridles, you might find corrals. It just kind of depends on the animal. So this is what's called the Natufian puppy burial. It is from the Middle East in Israel. It's over 9,000 years old. And this didn't come out right, but the puppy is actually under her hands. So it was a female. It was buried with a puppy. Of course, we don't know. We assume the puppy maybe was killed to accompany this person into the afterlife. Who knows? But again, when you start seeing people buried with animals, it means a close bond and domestication. So throughout here I've put a couple of my animals. I actually have quite a few animals. I have 2 horses, I have 2 miniature donkeys, I have 4 dogs and 4 cats and a couple of birds. So here is my one dog, Sherpa, who's a husky, and he's not real happy, looking like an angel. There's Sherpa again. Underneath you have a picture of me with my St. Bernard Karma. She actually now is deceased. She was a great dog. And there on the right you have a picture of my Old English sheepdog. Right now I have 2 huskies, an Old English sheepdog, and a German shepherd I'm actually doing search and rescue training with. So you should know about dog domestication. I put stuff on Blackboard for you to read about that. And you should also know about cat domestication. It's a picture of one of my cats looking at one of my dogs on the computer. And let's not forget about horses, so I also put something online about horse domestication.